welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with. It's the interview series presented by WFPK at WFPK.org, Consequence, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Thanks as always for making your way here and checking out the series. Of course, you know what to do. If you like what you see, what you hear, hit that subscribe button. I put out 3 new interviews every single week, so it's a great way to keep up with your favorite artists. And I'm excited to have him back on. It's been just a handful of months, but back once again, Chris Shiflett. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. And this might be the quickest return guest. Like I have my usuals, my yearly guests, but I don't know that I've had anyone on because we talked early in the year. You had a new single out, but now the album Lost at Sea is finally here. And I can say finally because this is a multi-years journey for you, right?
It really is. Yeah, I feel like I put this record out 2 years ago, like internally. But you know, I'm happy that it's finally that the full length's finally coming out because, like you said, we've been putting songs out all year and doing some shows around all that. But it'll be great to have the full length out. It's a labor of love, but it really it takes so long to figure out how you're going to put out your record and then get it all together and get the artwork together and do all that stuff and you know, as a musician, you want to put it out like the day you get the final mix, but it just never works out that way. So, you know, I've been living with these songs for a minute and I'm just glad to let them loose, let them fly.
Yeah. Well, you know, the compliments, it's a great record to listen to. It's a fun record to listen to. It almost, the more and more I listen to it, I think surely there's lots of thought that's went into the sequencing of this as well, because at times it almost feels like a story. It almost feels linear, if that makes sense. Even starting with Dead and Gone and ending with Parties, which are 2 very different things, but for some reason, even comically, they almost feel like they, you know, are the perfect bookends to everything that happens in the middle.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's great to hear. It is funny because you do put a lot of thought into the sequencing. I always think of sequencing as like if the album were a gig, you know, you want it to sort of like have ebbs and flows and jump up at some points and kind of mellow out at some, you know, and that whole thing. So, but it's great. That's nobody has said that to me yet, so I appreciate that. Because you know, you write like all these songs were written in that time, like right before I started making the record or during making the record, except for Damage Control. It's the only old one that was on there. So, like unintentionally, there is some through line through it all, you know, because it's just the things that you're thinking about in that little time period, you know, the things that are on your mind, and
Yeah.
so it does sort of form like a little snapshot of 2020, 2021.
Well, especially when any artist, I think, you know, writes, as you said, sort of all the songs come almost around the same time. Inevitably, not only do you get the through line, but you'll get some of those words, you know, the same words will pop up multiple, you know, and there are multiple ones, but the 2 I centered on were birthdays and damage.
I know. What's the deal? What's the deal with birthdays? Why does that keep popping? Because that's not even just this album. I was thinking about that the other day. Like, how many songs have I written about my birthday, my wife's birthday, somebody's birthday? You know what I mean? It seems to pop up. The one that my wife calls me on all the time is, she's like, "How many songs are you gonna write that you reference PCH? Like, just stop. You can't ever reference PCH again." And enough with the swear words. So that's my goal for my next record is there's gonna be no beach references. How about that? I get it. I live by the beach. I love the beach, but enough of that. And it's gonna be entirely clean.
You know, I had Ronnie Dunn from Brooks and Dunn on last year, and his record that he put out last year had whiskey and neon in every single song, I believe, on the record.
Yes.
So you didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, at least he's consistent. Yeah.
Some of those things just kind of pop up. It is fun though. So much of I know when people talk to you about your solo music, especially if they're new to it, knowing your history either from pre-Foo days or the Foo Fighters, it's always like, where the hell did this come from? And it's funny hearing those in the interviews because I watched some of your interviews and it seems to pop up. but it's, I know the long history is there. I did want to back up sort of pre this album and everything. When did you start digging into the type of music that you sort of have found yourself doing in your solo work?
Well, I've been listening to it for a long time, but I never tried to play anything that sort of had that influence, that sort of like country and Americana influence until the first Dead Peasants record that I made. But even that was a long time ago. It is a funny thing, I've talked about this before, but I have a lot of friends in country music and Americana and in that sort of side of music. And nobody from that side of the aisle ever says like, "What, you like rock music?" You know what I mean? And yet everybody from the rock side of the music is like, "What, you like country?" Like I honestly I don't get why that's such a shock. I
Yeah.
just don't, like, you know what I mean, to people, like, they're not that far apart musically, especially nowadays. Jesus, like country and rock music are like my personal theory is that like all genres are slowly melting into the same sound, which I think
Absolutely.
holds up if you listen to just about anything. It's all kind of the same production styles or kind of run through, and I mean like whether it's pop music or R&B or rock and roll or country or
Mhm.
anything.
Mhm.
There's a lot of overlap nowadays, in a way that was not the case like when I was growing up, when everything seemed very separate. And
Right.
that's cool. Like I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's cool. But I think like and I think even just like there's a lot of overlap in with people's musical tastes, like the people that like country music and people that like alt rock and stuff. I do think there's a lot there. So I don't know. It's I'm a guitar player. I love guitar playing and all the good guitar playing. I hate to say it, but the most interesting guitar playing has been in country music for a long time. It ain't in rock music. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in rock music too, but for the type of guitar playing that I like, way more interesting. My taste. I'm not saying like this is some
Mhm.
grand judgment, but my taste leans more to country pickers. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that like that's not what I grew up in.
Mhm.
It's not really what's in my hands. I like playing, stuff that's kind of country influence, but it's not like it doesn't sound like that when I do it. It sounds like an old rock hack trying to play some, Don Rich licks or whatever, and that's what I like. Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the more and more I thought about that too, because I was looking back, like, I mean, I grew up in rural Kentucky, so I grew up, before I moved to the big city of Louisville. It was you had top 40 radio and country radio, and so I 80s and 90s country, like that's, I know it all. And that's, it's all there. But even when I'm not saying anything new here. When I first heard Social Distortion, that's what I recognized in Social D, and what
sure.
they were doing, because that was there. It's not, to your point, it's not so surprising because those mixtures have always been there.
Yeah.
It is funny to see people's revelations when they hear this, and to, the oh my god sort of thing. Like, it's got an interesting point, especially being in your seat.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing. Like I think like country music is sort of like one of the last things people can kind of openly make fun of it. I don't know why. It's like to people who don't listen to country, they just think that all country music is the the one version of the corniest hee haw version of it that you can point your finger at, as opposed to what it really is, which is this massive, it's a huge umbrella. It's a big tent. There's a lot of different sounds and there's a lot of different styles in it. And there's the poppier side and there's the rootsier side and there's everything in between. And yeah, I mean, like I don't know. It's just a funny thing with people have a sort of a bias in a weird
Yeah.
way. You know what I mean? It's funny.
Well, I'm glad you're bridging that gap.
And well, I'm glad you mentioned Social Distortion because really, like, I came out of like rock music and heavy metal and then punk rock eventually. And Social D, like, I was like obsessed. Like when Prison Bound came out,
Mhm.
like that record totally changed my life. And it's not like it was a country record by any stretch of the imagination, but there were songs on it that like a song like Prison Bound, that had a more of a almost like a country style narrative. And then Social D would always throw in like cover songs a big loud version of an old honky tonk song or something, and between them and bands like X that dabbled in some of that as well, like that really, um, as much as like my old Stones records that would have Dead Flowers or whatever on it that would sort of lean a little bit that way. I mean, that was sort of like that mixed with 90s alt country was sort of that was my way in, you
Yeah.
know.
And yeah, because what John Doe after X, like he's become a great Americana singer. And I think,
Yeah.
and I know there's more examples of that. Like that seemed like a natural path for a lot of folks that started in punk to go that way, for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
sure.
Yeah.
I know the reason, because you get older and you just, your tastes slow down a little and mellow out a little, and you lean a little more on the lyrics, and all that. It makes sense.
I mean, and to that point, it's surprising the people who haven't. And again, this is not a judgment, but for the people who have felt like they've had to stay in the lane, like they're held to a sound. I'm thinking like Billy Idol or something like that. Like if he puts out music, it's still got to be Billy Idol. It's still got to be a little bit of that big arena punk from the '80s or something like that. It's like
We just actually played with Billy Idol. Where was that? At a festival up in Aspen. It was so good.
mhm.
He came out and he did a Pistol song with us. It was great.
And that's what I'm saying. No judgment. I love Billy and love seeing what he's done and his new records. But it's I don't know what I'm getting at here. That's it's the choices you make as an artist. But some of those find the way out, and some artists are like, this is the box that I'm in.
Well,
Yeah.
so I mean, I think it sort of depends on the artist. If it's like AC/DC or the Ramones, like clearly that's like those bands had a sound, or
Mhm.
in the case of AC/DC, have a sound. Uh, and I don't know how much is that they didn't want to deviate from it, or if it's just that that's just what came out of them naturally, which is what I suspect it more sort of is.
Yeah.
It is a funny thing with music. It's like people want you get criticized if you do the same thing, a similar thing for a long time, but then you get criticized if you don't too. So it's
Yeah.
pick your poison. If I think at the end of the day, if you're lucky enough to have a long career, like you know, you're just gonna catch some shit one way or another.
But hearing songs on here like God, I love Carrie Midnight Texas Queen. I don't know how you can't not like that song. You
Oh,
know,
thank you.
as we're
I was
even
thinking about
talking.
that song. I was thinking about that song today because I'm actually in Austin. I'm gonna play a solo gig at Antone's tonight, and things have been really busy. But I was like, oh man, we should have figured that one out. We should have got that worked that one up in the set. It's like about here, like literally here.
But that's those moments in there where I hear all the multiple influences coming at once. And not that we have to go further down that, but where did that song come from at all? Because I know you did some co-writing this, and I think we were talking about the single earlier this year with was it Blacktop White Lines? Is that the name of it?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like we were talking about characters, like the use of characters, not so much biographical. Is this one of those moments?
This one was it was actually just a song title that I had written in a notebook. Um, that was just the title was inspired by an actual, a gal that I used to know. Um, but I don't know why I wrote that down one day. Just Carrie Midnight Texas Queen, like, and it just sat there for I think for years, and I kept thinking, oh man, I got to write that song. And then I got together with Carrie and Nick to write, and I don't remember exactly how we got onto it, but usually when you're doing those things, everybody's like, well, I got this idea, or what if I got this idea, and for whatever reason we jumped into it and wrote that, and and it was sort of, it's definitely not like a straight up diary entry or anything. It's kind of embellishing on the facts a little bit just to make it have a narrative and a flow to it. But I was really happy with how that one came out because a lot of times when you write with other people, it's the beauty of it is that you get a bunch of different people's perspective. The part that can be a little challenging if it's a song that you're going to record is that you sort of start to lose your connection to it because it's for exactly the same reason because lyrically it's no longer your story, but that one somehow it kept, I don't know, it just worked, and writing with those guys was great, and it was one of those songs that just kind of came together pretty fast.
Yeah, and it's
I
fun.
mean, I remember when we recorded it too, like we were the first like mix of it or rough board mix of it, it was all just a little too clean and nice. My guitar sounded a little too nice, and I that one was definitely one of the ones I was like, it sounds like I don't know. It's just a little. It was like maybe uncomfortable because it was a little too straightforward. So I went in and roughed it up a little bit, after the fact.
It was that we're talking about it, and you mentioning Austin and everything, and Bob Schneider. You familiar with Bob? He was
Bob Schneider.
he's one of the big. He's like for a long time was like the king of Austin singer songwriters. Anyway,
Ah,
yeah, worth checking out if you're not. But he's got a few songs in that style anyway, and it's like, all right, this you didn't mean to, but it just makes sense in this whole world, this Austin galaxy of music,
yeah.
that's down there.
Yeah, I mean, I was like really kind of like pulling from memories of when I was in No Use for a Name, and we would always tour through Texas, and you'd play emos or whatever, and I don't know, that was always a good stronghold for
Mhm.
our band, and just for that scene, the shows were always really good down in Texas.
Yeah. Parties. I mentioned that closing out the album. Is that an actual thing that you're dealing with? Have you?
Yeah, I don't get invited to parties. It's true, for a lot of reasons. Um, I definitely I mean, I was thinking about an actual dinner that had happened that the week that I wrote it, where I just seemed like I was just out of step with the conversational flow of the entire table. Um, but also, it's a little bit too um, and I don't like to dwell on this too much, but I got sober a long time ago, and that's kind of an element of that song too. Is when you sort of remove yourself from the wing ding. Eventually, you just stop getting invited.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
do know,
happens.
and something about that. It's just getting older too.
Yeah.
There's a there's a Walkman lyric, the band The Walkman, from their big single The Rat. I've loved it. I loved it because I think Hamilton Lighthouser wrote this line when he was in his early 20s, which is hilarious to me because the line is, when I used to go out, I knew everyone I saw. Now I go out alone if I go out at all.
Yeah.
It's sort of like when Joni sings both sides now, at 19 and at 60 or 70 or whatever. It's sort
Yeah.
of like how,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, those
I
lyrics
know.
of,
I know that feeling well.
just it is funny how the lyrics, I don't know how they speak at different points in your life or something like that. But
Yeah.
even the heavy subject of that song, by the way, it's a fun one. And Dead and Gone too. I mean, the whole thing, I love it. But you also have these, I'm hitting on these more party moments of the record, but like we've been playing Overboard in heavy rotation on FPK
Oh
here in
wow.
Louisville. And
Really?
yeah, that's such a good song. And then when I hear What Weighs You Down, and I think that's one of the most interesting sweet songs, way to be sweet in a song that I think I've ever
Yeah.
heard.
And it's about a birthday.
And it's about a birthday.
Of course, it's about a birthday. How could it be about anything else? Um,
Do you remember? Do
yeah,
you remember getting where that inspiration when it hit?
100%. Yeah, I mean that the song was built around. I was just playing my baritone guitar, which guitar players out there will know has a very specific kind of thing to it, and just started playing that riff. And I was just noodling around on that, and then really just built the song around that. I just thought, oh, if we could come up with a good groove for this, it'd be a nice it could be a nice hooky riff. But lyrically, it was inspired by my wife's birthday, and that thing of like, that we all deal with getting older, and sort of reflecting on that. It's I don't know. I like, it's not always an easy thing to sort of realize, oh, my back's sore all the time, and look at all this gray hair, and like, um, not to say that my wife was struggling with that, but it's more me projecting on her, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Birthdays are
and
damage.
also, yeah, and like trying to just kind of say like, whatever, it's just a number. Look at how great our life is, like that's the references to our kids and stuff like that.
It really is just one of the most sweet songs, and in such a different way than I've usually heard that. I mean, all the
Oh, thank you.
compliments. Yeah. Um, I'll kind of wrap up with this too, because the other side of everything that you're doing, you've got this great podcast that I've been enjoying called Shredding with Shifty, and this is still sort of a new series for you, right? This comes after Walking the Floor. What was, I mean,
Yeah.
is that just a business thing? I mean, why did you make the shift?
Yeah, well, I had done walking the floor for a long time, for around 10 years or so, and I just needed to do something different, really, is what it came down to. I love doing it. It was super fun, but at a certain point, I just got tired of hearing my own voice in that context and just wanted to do something, and even just the way I just wanted to put it out a little bit differently and sort of be able to assemble a team to help out, because with walking the floor it was just like a one-man show. But and it's been great. This first season has just like exceeded all expectations for the guests. We've had some really good ones so far, and there's a bunch that aren't out yet that are great. Like we just put out Brad Paisley, but we're
Mm-hmm.
about to put out Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke is the next one. Blake from Jawbreaker, Mike McCready, Mike Campbell from the Heartbreakers. There's a whole bunch, and there's we're we're honing in on the final 4 or 5 guests that I was able to do like a 10 or 11 interviews before I left for tour, and then there's so we got to get that the last the last batch done here before too long. But it's been really great, man. It's been I've learned a lot about guitar, which it's a deep dive on guitar playing and everything connected to it with all the gear and all that stuff. But it's also like having all these different players sort of really get into the weeds on how they built these guitar solos and even just the songs themselves. It's been a real blast.
Yeah. And you get origin stories of stuff I've not heard,
Yeah.
like the rivers. I mean, like I like how you're doing it, because it's not like you're just jumping straight in to the gear talk and the riff talk or whatever. Like it's set up really, really nicely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean it's great. Like my hope is that that I can talk to all these people who I'm a fan of, and just and hopefully it's different than like their normal interview that
Mhm.
they do, where we can really spend some time just kind of casually talking about stuff. But hopefully, like it gets into like the type of conversation you would have with somebody backstage, or the
Right.
type of conversation you would have if you're both recording in the same studio and you're hanging out in the lounge having a coffee, and what are you playing on that track? There's that kind of stuff. That's sort of my hope for it.
Yeah. And I'm hoping it inspires some people too. I was talking with a friend of mine who I used to play with 20 years ago, and we were talking about I'd bought a pedal that I had 20 years ago, and he goes, kids now, they don't even use pedals. It's all like the computer um
Yeah,
samples and preamps and all that stuff. I'm like, I didn't even, and he's like, they don't even use amps. It's like you can't even do
yeah,
this kind of gear talk with this young generation. It's like I'm totally
yeah.
lost on that. It's
Oh, dude, you're playing through a deluxe reverb simulator. So sick.
like
I
cool.
can't I can't make fun of that because I do a bit of that myself with my solo thing, and I absolutely love it.
This is
So
a different
yeah,
world.
I get
It's
it. I get it. It really is, man. If you can not have to load your Marshall half stack in the back of your car to get down to the gig, I'm like all for it.
Well, I appreciate all you do. I love hearing this new series. The new record is so good, Lost at Sea. Congrats on finally getting it out, man.
Yeah, yeah. We got to get another one together here soon. I saw Jaron the other day. I was like, man, it's just about that time. Let's go.
Start working. I mean, if it takes you 3 years to get one out, yeah, you probably should start.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, at least we've got a team. Now we got a whole team built. So now we can, hopefully the next one will be like, just get it right out.
I appreciate you taking the time as always, man. It's great to catch up with you.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Good to see you, pal.
And thanks to my guest. Also, thanks to you for checking out the episode in the series. Before you get out of here, hit that subscribe button. Again, you get 3 brand new interviews every single week. New one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at right here on YouTube, or of course anywhere in podcast land, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, NPR, or WFPK.org as well. A great way to keep up with your favorite artists and discover new ones as well. Then after that, actually head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's an hour full of song premieres, music news, anniversary spins, bonus interviews, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern at WFPK.org. Consequence has your music and film news. You can also find me on the social media spots, Facebook, Instagram, mostly on Twitter. All 3 of them, the address is at Kyle Meredith. Do hope you like and follow along. That does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.